audio is working. I can't hear anything.
And we're back. So sorry for the blip.
Yeah, just as we get starting about how ScrewTube has automated bot algorithms to detect wrongthink, it shuts us down.
Yeah. So we had to reboot our entire computer, like the whole thing just crashed right as I was talking about how it might not even be a human being behind the keyboard listening to what we're saying. It's just they've got advanced voice recognition technology. They're extending that as fast as they can across the world to all the different languages so they can analyze that data and then act upon it in a programmatic way. And I don't have the resources to yet anyways to forensically prove that we were just sabotaged and sabotaged earlier. We've had multiple glitches throughout this show, but it's a common trope in the free speech community that they're listening. I mean, literally, if you can't even broadcast over the electromagnetic spectrum over radio without a license, supposedly. You know, they control the airwaves. And that was one thing I wanted to get through to Adam Green, you know, too, is, and actually, I think I'll have to open Telegram, but there was a good meme that I posted there, sort of pointing out that you can't go up, you can't go horizontal, you can't go anywhere, you can't even broadcast your voice through an invisible spectrum of information without the government like controlling you. So why would, you know, he asked, in my opinion, kind of a naive question about the motives. Why would they lie about that? Well,
pretty compelling
the same
motives.
reason they would lie about anything else, for their self-interest,
Right.
which are numerous.
It absolutely replete, and it dovetails in with everything that he's talking about. I mean, he even agreed right before we got into it that, you know, yeah, I mean, if they could convince the whole world of a fictitious savior, then he could easily see some of these more modern occult charlatans getting away with all kinds of scams and hoaxes. He did admit that.
True.
So it's just we're inviting him to really take that lens a little bit farther than he's been. On a lot of different people. We host a call-in line looking for more callers. Really appreciated the last caller, Riley. He's a repeat stalwart listener, supporter, and came up with some great points, insights, inquiries. So that's the kind of attitude we want to foster. So, and yeah, we were getting into.
Here's the meme that I was referencing from Not a Globe, Faking Space. Freedom, you ain't free. You can't go up because they own the airspace. You can't go across the sea because they own the waters. You can't leave your own country without a passport. And they're actually trying to like make it, you need a passport to go within your own country.
Right.
You can't do anything without permission. Try opening a business. Try anything.
Right.
Think about it.
Right.
Try being a hairstylist.
Right.
You want to cut some hair? You're good at it? You need a license from the public health department. You're in an open air prison. Don't pretend that you're not.
And I would say that last sentence, don't fool yourself. You have to take into account the whole quote that's attributed to Mark Twain, which is, it's easier to fool someone than it is to convince them they've been fooled.
Right.
And so maybe open up the possibility to the fact that maybe we're still fooled about a lot of things. Yeah. And that we shouldn't be the type of people that are so hard to convince that there's foolery about.
Right. And that brings me to another one of the key topics I wanted to bring up on today's show, episode 38, is some of the new content creators which we have installed on Zetetic.news is home site, specifically on the space news section. If you go to the news menu and you look at all the different options, there was a space news. I've changed it to lost history and space news because I think they are inexorably intertwined.
Absolutely.
So the whole questioning of the shape,
that's really just the first tier.
Is one part of it. It's not the whole kit and caboodle.
No.
The other part is just, if that is a lie, what else is a lie? About everything.
What's lying
that,
beneath our feet?
Yeah, beneath our feet, in front of our faces, etc. And one of the content creators, which I recently discovered since we last spoke, is this YouTube channel, Mind Unveiled. Now that we've mentioned it, they probably won't exist on YouTube anymore, and they'll have to go find their data and try to re-upload it somewhere else.
It makes you think, like, do we really only have 423 subscribers? Or is it 3 times higher?
Who knows?
Is it 10 times higher? Is it 5? I mean, it's like you can't even trust any of the information or the metrics or anything coming from the very people who have an incentive to censor you for wrong think.
Yep.
So how can you trust any of the metrics? It's just about the content and the opportunity to engage with what is increasingly being obviated as an open field of inquiry, the whole world.
Well, the good news is someone commented that, LOL, YouTube irony. So I think that was probably Riley in the chat, understanding that we were cut off at a very key section of our discussion, but
100%. I mean, because it was gonna crystallize back in with loaded frames and the fact that, look, everything is algorithmically manipulated, even our very perception. So yes, there is a hypnotic trance element to information relay and information engagement, and there's power of suggestion that is triggered through pre-existing inculcation, psychological conditioning, what have you. So yes, this is a much more complex, multifaceted reality than we have been led to believe on so many levels, religion included. But it expands and is far more just flabbergastingly different than what we've been told. And I think that is true through history, architecture, history, philosophy, you name it. It runs the gamut, as they say. It runs the gauntlet all the way through the superstructure of deception that's been built around us for what seems like time immemorial.
And I think that's a good segue into a snippet that I wanted to play of this content creator, Mind Unveiled, on YouTube. And they have a lot of content that I have yet to even traverse, but they are for sure zetetically oriented, perceived by inquiry. They're just asking good questions about preconceived notions that have been just served up to us on a silver platter. And to bring this conversation back to our roots at Zetetic.news, we've talked about before the influence of our geographic area. If we're going to be like, we're gonna sort of characterize, the influence of a given population. I think the Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Asheville, the North Carolina really is so influential, and there are a lot of untold secrets about North Carolina and its history that speak to, what we're talking about, not only control of our geopolitical system, the financial system, the socio medical system, with the cerveza virus, for example, and the propagation of the national fluoridation policy, the pushing of the LGBTQ agenda in our public schools. We are really leading the charge, unfortunately, in many of these areas. But Mind Unveiled did a specific almost 2.5 hour special on the Biltmore estate in Asheville, which we have talked about on previous episodes as being a good example of this insane architecture that just seemingly appears out of nowhere over a very short period of time in a very let's say primitive era of technological development, which would make such a structure, which has really not been replicated since then, seemingly impossible. And I've been to the Biltmore estate, not only on a field trip, but in family trips and so on. And I always come away with that very impression. How did this happen? How did this get constructed at this time? Wow. That's almost the tourist attraction itself. Is you get a brief glimpse, a little shard of information about this incredible house, which has nonsensical proportions and purposes. You're told this story about this artistic, this art collector, this eccentric of a wealthy family.
Right.
But then you're also supposed to believe that same family doesn't really have the same kind of material wealth as, say, someone like Bill Gates anymore.
Right.
Even though, Anderson Cooper is sitting up there at CNN and he's an heir. It's just something's not adding up here.
Sure.
So I want to play a few minutes of this. Mind Unveiled, Biltmore Unveiled, Vanderbilt's Underground, Asheville, North Carolina. And I highly recommend you just listen to the whole thing, because they start with the whole Vanderbilt family story to, their trajectory to prominence, how they acquired their wealth, so call it, and then what they started to do with it. And it's
right.
Maybe I'm just a bit retarded, but when I go there, that's all I'm asking myself is really? This guy, this is just a little tiny bit of wealth that he had, and this is what he constructed. In a hobby sense. They just had this during this weird period, this fancy for building mansions out of nowhere. It's just so bizarre.
And yet they're so glorious, and yet went so quickly out of style that even people hints that maybe had a more traditional sensibility with way more wealth could not even begin to establish costs for what it would take to reconstruct it.
It's highly conjecture when you talk about the cost.
So
of
these
the
are
material
this
wealth.
Comes into the whole question of the narratival construction of world historic individuals and family dynasties, and how much of this history is factual and how much of it is counterfeited and superimposed onto
everything
the record.
Is on the table for dissection. So
Definitely.
We're going to play a few minutes of this. Check this out.
Easily accessible, and you are most likely to hear it from a local legend. No one knows the answer. It's almost as if it's lingering on everyone's mind, but no one knows, so we just all accept the mainstream history. But deep down, we know that there has to be something more. There have been rumors of there being secret passages beneath the Masonic temple since its supposed construction in 1915. This is a well-known legend, and eventually, A paranormal investigator went to investigate with thermal sensors, and he did indicate where a tunnel would be near their own private bowling alley. But it would require excavation, which the members won't allow. So now it's basically blocked off because so many people tried to go see it. The local historians are just a bunch of skeptics, saying that no, these are just a few tunnels, prohibitions, blah blah blah. Man, these historians have no clue how to think. They just read the books and they have rote memory. That's not thinking. That's not comparative research. That's just mindlessly parroting the mainstream narrative. There's plenty of physical proof that shows multiple underground chambers in Nashville that everyone can see for themselves. Why would there be a door in a basement?
Throughout the 20th century, different businesses and their owners would renovate and modify this old building.
What did you think the first time you walked in this building?
How we're going to do this because it was cut up into all kinds of small offices. Before this, it was the city and county parole offices. So everybody had an office, and all that had to be torn out and got down to the bare minimum. It's come a long way since it's when we started this project to become a restaurant today. So.
It turned out the owners of these old businesses decades ago would not rip out of the old renovations. They'd simply add layers of construction.
Sandblasted the original brick. We took up 3 layers of hardwood floor to get to the original.
Literally 100 years of, I guess, progress rolled back to the original state.
Nature.
And the developers didn't realize the significance of what they'd find in the basement and how it would spark their creativity.
This just kind of jumped out at us. This giant tunnel in the basement made its history clear.
The Pax Tavern basement features an old entranceway to a tunnel system that was used to run bootleg liquor underground between downtown Asheville buildings. The entrance features 2 heavy iron doors. Stuart Coleman gave us a tour.
This tunnel here, it had access to a series of tunnels on the other side, and it had a double locking mechanism that locked.
You lock inside.
You lock yourself in and you lock other people out.
So these tunnels, were they really a secret to the authorities, or were they a secret officially, but everyone knew what was going on down here?
They were not secret because they run even under the Masonic Temple, and they run up here in front of the Biltmore building, and they discovered them in the park when they were redoing the vitalization of the park. There was a series of 4 tunnels that crossed over each other, and they were severed also by utilities.
Let me just remind you guys, you can go on the Wikipedia page and read about the mile-plus long tunnel that they dug just to run electricity to the Biltmore estate from a river or something. A first of its kind, by the way, with like Edison's involvement. Okay. This is with horse and buggy technology. Let's play the rest of this clip.
No
So
hydraulics.
it's kind of a similar video, but did you hear what that guy said? What would be the implications of there being tunnels that go all the way to the Biltmore? So this is what they tell us. They just built this whole city, which is completely on a hilly landscape with all these interconnected underground tunnel systems, basements with doors, a supposed subway project. How the heck did they do that in 1880 in such a short time period, and no one's gonna ask any questions? Subterranean levels to a city imply that there were actually the lower level of the building. I know that is not what we're taught, but why else would there be windows and doors in a basement? It's almost unimaginable because the alternative theory is so drastically different from what we have been told in our schools. Our programmed minds trained to react when faced with such cognitive dissonance must label the material as ridiculous, a complete fairy tale. And even though that may be the case, reality is far stranger than we were led to believe. I don't think we know everything about reality, and we deserve to question what we were taught in mainstream history. Do you believe everything we're told about the robber barons? To be honest, I don't, and I deserve that right. They have the burden of proof, and I'm just not convinced. I see red flags everywhere I look, and now that I look at this whole subject with new eyes, after looking into Tartaria for so long, you can clearly see that this is some type of propaganda to some degree. I think we can all, or a large majority of us, agree on that statement. They were celebrities, right? They were married to state politicians, right? Let's ask these questions, as it does seem that many people are beginning to wake up during these times. With that, we go to the final chapter.
It's a huge, very compelling area of inquiry that again is ongoing. It's expansive, and the implications are vast.
They have multiple, Mind Unveiled on YouTube has multiple exposés of the I'm trying to remember what they call it exactly, but it's it's like the reprogrammed, and it's this whole trend in the early 1900s, late 1800s of building orphanages and mental institutions for the societally unfit. And I think their overall gestalt is that this was like a reset program. And basically they reprogrammed a big part of the population. And it makes me wonder, because the oral history of my family doesn't really go back that far. Even though we supposedly, have written history going back at least 5,000 years.
Yeah, makes you question the veracity, efficacy, and reliability of dating really much of anything.
On that note, there was another subject which came up for me between episode 37 and now that I wanted to highlight in this same vein, and that's the Taj Mahal.
Yeah.
I sent you several messages about that because I had thought about it before. I just had never really delved into it. And I've even been to one of these big, huge mosque structures in the United Arab Emirates, and they're obscene. They are like
super intricate, nonsensically proportioned,
at great expense, ornate, filled with artifacts, not in the same vein as like Biltmore, where Biltmore was actually used as like a storage facility for so-called antiquities and other like subjects of national security interest during World War II. It was literally a storage facility commissioned by the government. Now it's state-owned, the whole thing, so anyways, the Taj Mahal always struck me as odd because, again, we're given this same kind of like touristic-y story about a ruler who loved his wife. And
how quaint.
If you even look into the ruler who loved his wife, he had like thousands of wives. So already your logic is being assaulted, right? By that very fact. And then you look at when it was purported to have been constructed, and the sort of the mainline academic literature around its dating and its construction are all European accounts of it after having been existed for like 30 some years, supposedly.
A big chunk of
And
the
so they're
documents,
literally
too.
traveling to India and encountering the locals and getting stories from them about how it was constructed. And that is what we know in the West as being the history. So, do we believe what the 1700 era European travelers were hearing from the locals in India at that time, or is there maybe something more to this?
Right.
And you look at the official story, y'all can go on Wikipedia and read about how this guy commissioned, 1,000+ elephants to carry marble that was quarried 350 miles from where it was built. And all sorts of other stuff like this, getting all these jewels and blah, 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 which they may well have had, just in the coffers, not necessarily having to go out and trade for them or whatever. But just the logistics, the manpower, etc., like on its face seems preposterous.
Ludicrous.
Because look at how India, who is becoming more industrialized, how they construct today. Are they even capable of these feats with hydraulic technology? I mean, why aren't we doing this anymore? Oh, it was just, excesses of a oligarchy, blah, blah, blah. It's the same pyramid story of, it's just, they commanded so much power, they had all these slaves, and you just see, it's all the
Artisan,
the manpower,
mastercraft slaves,
and also the beasts of burden. These slaves were also very adept, apparently, at using beasts of burden to lift heavy weights and move them over huge distances. Wow,
animal telepathy, cool.
And so I started to look into this and like some of the counter theories to this. And there's a lot of evidence actually that it was a renovation on top of something that existed much more ancient than before.
Just like huge swaths of the buildings we have today.
And I'll provide the link in the description. I don't have a specific clip here because the whole discussion is like 30 minutes long, but Marvin Mills was a professor who put forth a theory that, Taj Mahal was perhaps an earlier Vedic Indian tomb or palace, and that was seized essentially by the Islamic invaders of the time, and basically put a facelift on it that was Islamified.
Right.
And my whole, revelation on this is, if the original story was hard to believe, how they constructed it for people of the 1720s, 1730s
in rural India along a riverbank with beasts of burden and no hydraulics. If that was hard to believe, well, how hard is it to believe even more ancient people with ostensibly even more ancient primitive tools? How did they do that? Regardless of whether, there's this whole like political thing going on with India. There's like lawsuits with people who allege that this is like, we need to reclaim our heritage. This is like our, a Vedic symbol. It shouldn't be Islamified. And there's that whole thing. I'm not so interested in that whole thing because we don't really know if it was originally a Vedic temple either.
Well, right, because we're operating under this sort of misconceived teleological assumption that our current state is the most advanced, and basically our size is the same throughout time mostly.
Yeah.
And this is all pure presumption. There's no
I think that it's more likely that, like patterns in nature, there are fractals, and that we are probably a smaller fractal of beings that were similar to us that came before. And there's evidence of it, and it's probably covered up.